Findings and Analysis. This section presents the findings and analysis starting with the research scope identified in the Deaf and Disabled Writers Retreat focus groups and building evidence through 2 online surveys, practitioner and audience sector, and the focus groups, practitioner and sector. A. The retreat focus groups. The retreat focus groups identified both needs and barriers deaf and disabled writers experienced within the literature sector and those they had experienced while participating in the online retreat. We wanted to learn the lessons from participants in a writer development opportunity where meeting a variety of access needs had been our focus, mindful that access is not usually the main priority in literature development planning. It was important to have an external facilitator to support an open and wide-ranging conversation. We applied a thematic analysis to the transcripts from the conversations to identify the following 4 top-level and interconnected themes: barriers to accessing literature, funding and earning a living, lack of creative opportunities, co-production. The multiplying effect of loneliness when dealing with disability or illness. Retreat participant. Barriers to accessing literature. Many of the writers identified barriers around the support they need to navigate the industry and the challenges of finding support from people and organisations that understand their access requirements, especially around energy limitations and neurodivergence. Some of the contributions raised were the wheelchair becoming all in all seeing. Assumptions are being made as to what it is that you need when. For each person, it will be very different things. Retreat participant. You can't take a carer if the course is full. Retreat participant. Especially in the case of cognitive disabilities, being aware of the limitations of my condition is in essence a prerequisite to knowing what I need. Retreat participant. Funding and earning a living. Being disabled and young, it might be expected that I won't be paid because a gig is seen as an opportunity, but it's as a principle not okay. Retreat participant. The topic of money came up frequently, as might be expected, from both the point of view of there being a lack of investment in supporting tailored access needs and the difficulties faced by deaf and disabled writers to earning a living through writing. Creative opportunities. Making my way into the writing community is really difficult. There is no ongoing support or community, and I've been writing for 2 years. Retreat participant. Very much linked to the difficulties of deaf and disabled writers earning a living is the lack of creative opportunities for this group. This was articulated both from the perspective of finding appropriate support to develop a career, such as finding accessible residencies and suitable mentors, and available commissions. The latter was cited as being linked to the stigma surrounding deaf and disabled people's writing being seen as therapeutic. Disabled people's writing is perceived as something therapeutic, and there are a lot of great things done there, but the tendency is to put disabled writers or writers with long-term health conditions into that slot. Retreat participant. Co-production. Deaf awareness in theatres and institutions, publications, magazines, etc. No consultancy in place in order to genuinely welcome people in. Retreat participant. Participants called for more consultation, co-creation and co-production with deaf and disabled writers to understand the intersectionalities of creative practitioners and audiences. They called for greater dialogue and involvement in the planning of literature events and opportunities so that access needs were better understood and supported. The need for intersectionality and understanding how intersectional we all are. As artists and creatives, we all have at some point in our lives needs and wishes and hopes, so the option to articulate what we need and the nuances is important outside of just ticking the boxes. We need to use our voices and co-produce and speak to our discomfort. Retreat participant. The impact learnings from the retreat can be found on page 21. The full retreat case study, including the access provisions put in place, can be found at https://www.spreadtheword.org.uk/projects/cryptic-rights-the-word. B. Surveys and external focus groups. Having scoped the parameters of the research through the conversations with retreat participants, we went out to the literature sector and deaf and disabled writers and audiences to corroborate, challenge, and build on their inputs. Barriers to accessing literature. No information about accessibility means that it's inaccessible. Writers Survey Respondent. The surveys identified the majority of deaf and disabled writers are continuing to engage with literature activities online. 70% of deaf and disabled writers and audiences are accessing literature activities online and only 16% in person. However, organisations are running 67% of activities in person and 56% of online and or hybrid. Prior to lockdown and the normalisation of holding events online, I lacked opportunities to participate in cultural events, writing and learning opportunities, and networking with other people in a safe way that did not threaten my health and well-being. Then I tasted the freedom and opportunities online. Now the gradual, or in some cases sudden, withdrawal of online opportunities is harder than pre-lockdown. Writers Survey Respondent. The top 4 barriers, above 50%, to accessing literature activities for deaf and disabled writers and creative producers outside of paid work, which was the top barrier, and cost, see Funding and Earning a Living, page 16, are events or workshops taking place in inaccessible places, online and or in person, 63%. Lack of understanding by the organisation of adjustments that need to be made, 59%. Not clear who to contact to ask questions about support available, 53%. Lack of clear information on accessibility of events, workshops and opportunities, 51%. I don't want to be restricted to a deaf ghetto. It needs to be seen as the norm to build in accessible practices for all performances, talks and workshops as far as humanly possible, and the norm to see deaf and disabled writers both leading and taking part. Writers Survey Respondent. The survey findings also showed barriers to engaging with literature activity due to pacing of work in workshop or events, 42%, lack of breaks at workshop events, 36%, tight deadlines for delivery of work, 36%, workshop and reading materials not being provided in advance, 32%, and lack of accessible transport to venue, 27%. Lack of relaxed performances or relaxed events, schedules that are too full and intense and don't allow for differing energy levels. I fear that my difficulties reading and writing fast will be judged. Writers Survey Respondent. When considering deaf and disabled people as audiences for, as opposed to participants in, literature events, the top 3 barriers, above 50%, to accessing literature activity outside of cost, see Funding and Earning a Living, page 16, are lack of clear information on accessibility of events, workshops and opportunities, 60%, lack of understanding by organisation of adjustments that need to be made, 60%, events, workshops taking place in inaccessible spaces, online and or in person, 59%. At 40%, the lack of clarity on who to ask questions about support available was also a significant barrier. The survey findings also showed barriers to engaging with literature activity due to lack of breaks at workshops and events, 42%, workshop and reading materials not being provided in advance, 29%, and lack of accessible transport to venues, 24%. 43% of deaf and disabled audience members, and 39% of deaf and disabled writers and creative producers said that organisations not putting in place reasonable adjustments was a significant barrier. One of the things I've always struggled with is people want to know in advance, understandably, what poets are going to perform, but often poets are responding to the audience and they don't want to know what their set is. That's an interesting tension, isn't it? When you want to make sure it's accessible, but also you want to make sure your artists are able to perform in a way that they want to perform. Literature organisations focus group participant. Over half the literature organisations, 56%, do not have an access policy, while 89% of literature organisations rated their and their team's understanding of making organisations' work accessible to deaf and disabled writers and audiences as low or average. 11% always provide workshop or reading materials in advance and trigger warnings, verbally, on materials or in communications, access lists for pre-booking, and ensure accessible online communications. Only 12% always provide transcriptions. 33% always provide captioning, build in regular breaks to workshops and events, and provide access information for event activities standard. Only 12% of literature organisations have a website compliant with access standards, with 15% of deaf and disabled writers and creative producers and 19% of deaf and disabled audiences finding signing up for and booking literature activity inaccessible. Improvements were seen when asked about proactively asking for information on access needs, where 44% always get information from artists and participants on access needs and provides free space for personal assistance. 56% always have wheelchair access. More understanding from people in the writing industry that disabled people may not be how they expect writers to be, and that they need to make reasonable adjustments. Writers Survey respondent. The experience of deaf and disabled writers, creative producers and audiences in engaging with literature activities is reflected in the findings for organisations where there is a significant lack of deaf and disabled awareness and understanding of the duty to make reasonable adjustments in an anticipatory manner and what this looks like practically. There is an appetite for greater support to improve access among literature organisations. 78% of literature organisations said they would welcome best practice guidance. 67% training specific to literature organisations and peer-to-peer learning, and 56% how-to guides. Even if you want to do your own research, there is a need to constantly be slightly ahead of it, and it'd be lovely to have a place to at least find resources, at least to be set on the right path. Literature organisations focus group participant. In the retreat and across the surveys and focus groups, deaf and disabled writers were calling for clear information about accessibility provisions, a greater awareness and openness of access needs. They want there to be a clear point of contact, ideally someone who's disabled or someone who has been trained, so that conversations about access are easier and feel less awkward. It is important to make materials available in a range of formats and consider the timings of an event or workshop. There were also calls for inclusive language and the recognition of invisible impairments, including energy limiting impairments and neurodivergence. Writers and audiences feel that it can be more difficult to ask questions and ask for reasonable adjustments to support invisible impairments. For me, An accessible literature event has three aspects. 1. Collaboration with disabled people in designing and planning the event. 2. Representation of disabled people in the content of the event, and then access, online and in person. And 3. Lots of details. Live captioning, BSL, scheduled breaks, a system of turn-taking, quiet zones, etc. Writers' Focus Group participant. For organisations, there was an admission that access needs were not often well understood, and there were calls for more information and training. There was recognition that support was needed to improve communications and design to make workshops and events more accessible, including taking the lessons learnt during COVID into future hybrid events. The industry's primary concerns about how to provide access were around cost and knowledge level, not at a systems level, suggesting a priority need and desire for industry training and development. From the survey, emerging themes and responsibilities of funders, monitoring targets, and intersectionality were raised. Stop funding groups and events held in inaccessible venues. Writers' Survey respondent. Require more monitoring information showing how groups attract and work with deaf and disabled communities. Writers' Survey respondent. I'm thinking about how the Arts Council have an environment policy. Is there something like that for access? Organisations around the country are so different, not just in size, but in makeup and audiences. So there would not be one thing that would fit everyone. But can there be guidance on these and targets that you have to reach in order to receive money from us, or to be considered a viable artistic endeavour in this time? Literature Organisations Focus Group participant. Understanding intersectionality better, and that being disabled is often not our only identity. Writers' Survey respondent.